Give you the praise in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, brother.
Should be on. Can you all hear me all right? All right, now, this is directed towards me, but if I am ever too quiet, please, put your ear up, let me know. I have a tendency to get not a lot more quiet, that's really bad grammar. I have a tendency to get quiet. So, if I ever get too quiet, just let me know. I'll try to speak up, speak louder. My name is Nick Hilliard. This is my wife, Shani, and we have 2 kids. And you may have already seen Gabriel running around. He's our little boy. He's 2 years old. And he is just into everything. And he's definitely learned that he can be very loud as well. We actually were dealing with that in the car, where he just decided it was the best time to scream. And it's a lot of fun. And then we have Adeline as well. She's a lot cuter, a lot quieter. We love them both. We're very glad to be traveling with them both. And we are going to the Amazon. So where we are going to be at is, now we've got a little map back there. It's where Colombia, Brazil, and Peru, their borders all meet. That is where we're going to be at. That's why we say the Amazon. Because even though most of our work will hopefully be on the Brazilian side, there's a lot of work with the tribes that can be done on the Colombian side and Peruvian side as well. So it's a really neat opportunity what God has given us. Really looking forward to sharing more about that. But today, for our Sunday school lesson, we're going to be in the book of Ruth. Ruth. I noticed in the Sunday school, not the pamphlet, but the name just escaped me. The bulletin. Yeah, it's such a difficult word to remember. In the bulletin, I noticed that that's actually in your Bible reading this week. So hopefully I can make it interesting enough to you, so when you get to it Thursday, man, I remember him preaching about this. I really like the book of Ruth. I think it's probably one of the cooler books in the Old Testament. Just a really neat story, looking at the main context of how Boaz as a picture of Christ, as the kindred redeemer, and how he redeems Ruth. And Ruth couldn't do anything to earn that. And it's a really, really amazing story, but I want to look at it from a little different angle. Instead of looking at the book of Ruth from Ruth's perspective, I want to look at the book of Ruth from Naomi's perspective. And before we ever get into this, I want to make an analogy, just to help make this a little clear. Now, there's plenty of ladies in here. Do any of you ladies like watching the Hallmark Channel? Yep, my wife loves the Hallmark Channel. This last Christmas, I was forced to watch many Christmas Hallmark films. And both me and my father-in-law, we both noticed, it's a really easy trend to follow. Most Hallmark films, they follow some very similar stages. There's always going to be some kind of backstory, and it's a tragic backstory too. Whether it's the person's a widower, a widow, just a bad breakup, bad divorce. There's some kind of tragic backstory. And then when you first get there, then there's a rejection. The two people meet, and there's a rejection initially. And then there's that attraction. They realize that they want to be with each other. And all of a sudden, then there's a conflict of some kind. There's always conflict. But somehow, and I never know quite how they do it, there's a resolution at the end. Somehow they get together. But you always find these same stages in these Hallmark movies. And what I noticed as I read through the book of Ruth is that you'll find some very similar stages in the book of Ruth as well. Except, in my opinion, Ruth is a lot more exciting than a Hallmark movie. But in Ruth, when we first read through this, we'll notice that there is truly a tragic backstory. Naomi loses her husband. She loses both of her sons. That's a very tragic backstory. We see how at some point Naomi does she starts looking for an opportunity. But then she rejects it. You see that conflict. And then we see the conflict with Ruth and Naomi. We see that, let me back up. I'm skipping stages here. After we see the rejection from Naomi, we see that there is an attraction between Ruth and Boaz, but there's a conflict. And we see Naomi and her part and her angle of all this. She's viewing all this and she wakes up to it. And she realizes that she needs to give instruction to Ruth. that she can continue. And then we do see that resolution. So it's just a really, really amazing book. And so we're going to look at some of these stages, and we're going to look at them not from Ruth's perspective, but from Naomi's perspective. So Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. We'll go ahead and we'll read the first couple verses here. It says in verse 1, "Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband." And before we dig in any further, I would like to open up in prayer. Heavenly Father, it's such a blessing to be out here in Colorado, just to be able to enjoy the handiwork of your creation, just to see what an awesome job that you've done. Just to be able to glorify you and see just what an awesome God that you are. I ask that you, Lord, that you help me this morning as we look at Ruth. Help me to be able to preach this, to be able to teach this, just to show how big you are and to show our place, to show how we should listen to you, how we need to obey you and look to you. And Lord, I ask that you just help us to learn something from Ruth, from Naomi specifically. I ask all this in your name. Amen. So, right now we're in the backstory here, and just to give a little more history to this is during the time of the Judges. And from what I can tell, the history that I've read up on, this is probably during the time of Ehud. Which Ehud, if you don't know, he was a lefty who killed the fatty. And that's the really, really shortened version of it. It's actually a really, really cool story of how God provided deliverance for Israel. But it's during the time of the Judges. And what I noticed first here is that in verse 1 it says that, verse 2, it says that Elimelech, he went out to the country of Moab. And I've heard this preached both ways, where some people look at Elimelech and they say that he did wrong because he took his family out of the country of Israel where God wanted them to be at. So they look at that as a point of disobedience on Elimelech's part. And I've heard other preachers look at he was taking care of his family. He was making sure that during this time of famine that he could take care of his family, that he could properly provide for them. And really, whatever way you look at it, God allowed a famine in the land. And through that famine, God gave this man, this family, an opportunity to be a witness to the country of Moab. To be a witness to Ruth and Orpah and their family. Because if you think about it, going back all the way to Genesis 12, when God first gives the promise of the land to Abraham, one of the promises that He gives to Abraham is that in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. One of the commands that He gave to Israel is that they were supposed to be God's mouthpiece. They were supposed to be God's testimony, God's witness to all the earth. It wasn't that they were supposed to worship God and be happy with that, be content with that. They were supposed to tell all people who their God was, who the God was, so that they could also worship Him as well. So however you look at Elimelech's actions, either way, it still came to the fact that they had this opportunity to be a witness. And that's what the church is for. That's what we're supposed to be. That's our job. God has not just created us and allowed us to know Him just so we can come to church and so we can be saved and we can glorify Him. That's part of it. But a greater part of our job, of our responsibility, is that all may know. Everywhere that they may know, in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost. So we have to get that backstory done before we get to anything else. So now let's go ahead. We'll get into the first point. We'll look at Naomi. In verse 6 is where we really first see her role, her responsibilities doled out. And what I call this stage, this would be the listening stage, the looking stage. In verse 6 it says, "Then she arose with her daughters-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people, giving him bread. What I want to focus on here is that term when she said she had heard in the country of Moab. She heard about what God was doing. She was looking for that opportunity to go back to Israel. She was looking for an opportunity to do something else. And likewise, really, if we're going to get anything done for God, if we're going to move forward in life, we have to be looking. We have to be listening for those opportunities. And here, specifically, she's listening. She heard about how God was working. That should be what we're listening for. It's so easy to get bogged down with so many different distractions in the world, whether it's issues with our jobs, issues with just regular life, whether we have enough money for the next utility bill, enough money for the water bill. There's so many ways to get distracted. But we need to be listening for God and what He's doing. That's the first stage that I see Naomi go through. But then what we see next, the second stage, is what I call the stage of rejection. In verse 7, we'll read on down to verse 13. It says, "Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return into the land of Judah." Already we see that she has this opportunity to proselytize, or to essentially convert 2 Moabites to Judaism. "And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. She kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again." This is the rejection. "Turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me." Now what I see here is that very, very specifically, very clearly, God gave that opportunity to Naomi to bring both these ladies into a closer relationship to God, into actually having a full knowledge of who God was. And before she ever gets to that point, she tells them, "Turn again." She tells them twice. Well, first she tells them, "Go, return," and then she tells them 2 times after that, "Turn again, turn again." What I realize is that she, at any point in here, she never asks them what they want to do. She makes that decision for them. I think in relation to us and what we do, and really I'm preaching to myself here. How many times do we make that decision for that unsaved person? God puts that on our hearts to witness to them, and we make that decision for them. Say, no, they're not going to care about the gospel. I mean, can't you see, God, by the way that they're dressed, by the way that they look, or maybe we know something about them? Just look at the way they're living, God. They don't want the gospel. They just don't want. And how many times do we make that decision? And for me, the greatest guilt that I have in this is, a couple years ago, I used to work in a warehouse. There are several people in there. I did get to witness to a couple people in there, but there are some people I did make that decision. Now, there's one really foul-mouthed man that I remember, Jeff, and I'll be honest, I did not like that guy. He was so loud, so obnoxious. No one wanted to be around Jeff. And I made that decision. God, you can clearly see he doesn't care about the gospel. All he cares about is that someone listens to him in some way about whatever story he's talking about now. He doesn't care. I made the decision for him whether he wanted to continue his life and go to hell. That's not our decision to make. What we should do is we should obey Christ. We should obey God when He puts that on our heart to witness to that person, that man or that woman, whatever the situation is, that witness. Not to tell them to turn again, Not to try to make up excuses as to why we can't talk to them. Not to make excuses as to why they're not going to understand. Naomi tried doing all that. First she tried to tell them what they wanted to do, and then she started making excuses from her own culture of the common tradition back then was that a kindred, whether it was another brother, another son, another close relative, they would have to raise up the name. And she was looking at all these different reasons why she wasn't able to provide for them, why she wasn't able to bring them back to Judah. And we do the same thing. We find all kinds of reasons why we can't. Shouldn't be our choice. We should let that person have that choice of will they choose or reject, not us. That's the second stage that I see that Naomi goes through, is that stage. Now thankfully though, she doesn't stay in that stage. Let's go ahead and go on to chapter 2. And I almost forgot, what time do we typically end Sunday school? 1:45. All right, so I'm still doing good on time. So, in chapter 2, we'll read verse 1, and we'll read the first couple of verses here. It says, And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, Let me now go to the field, and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, Go, my daughter. She went, and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was a light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. I really like that phrase in verse 3. It says, And her hap. It just so happened. Circumstances fell about that she just happened to come into Boaz's field. It just so happened that she happened to come upon the field of a kindred redeemer. And it's so amazing when we look back at the opportunities that God gives us, and it just so happened that God allowed our paths to cross. It just so happened that God had us at a certain place at a certain time for a certain reason. That's just so amazing. One of the guys that we work with in Bearing Precious Seed, he mentioned, and it was a really neat testimony, they do a lot of printing ministries. They'll take equipment to these churches, they'll set it up so that the church can actually be a part of printing the Bible, or printing a John and Romans, and collating it, putting it all together. And they were just having major issues with their truck, with their trailer as they're trying to get this out. And I want to say they were going to some place in Kansas or Oklahoma. And the truck just kept breaking down. And they're trying to figure out why in the world. They had done everything. They had checked the vehicle. But God just continued to let them break down. And so they had to stop at this truck stop and shop. And the trucker, he was able, or the mechanic owner, he was able to talk to them, to work on the vehicle, to fix it. And I remember Tyler, he was like, and the guy just wouldn't shut up. He just kept talking. And then finally Tyler realized, well, wait a second. God has allowed me to be broke down right here. He's allowed me to go through this tragedy, this circumstance that I do not want to be in of my own accord. He's allowed me to stop for a reason. It was my hap broken down in this state, along this particular highway, at this particular truck stop, at this particular truck shop, or this mechanic shop, to talk to this one mechanic. It's amazing how God works out our lives like that. To be able to witness to people. But I could spend a lot more time on that, but let's go down to verse 18. This is a part, because remember, we have to focus on Naomi here. We're not focusing on Ruth, because focusing on Naomi. And this is speaking of Ruth here. It says, And she took it up, verse 18 of chapter 2. And she took it up and went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned, and she brought forth and gave to her that she had reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, Where hast thou gleaned today? And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. She showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, The man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, Blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, This man is near of kin to us, one of our next kinsmen. This is a point where Naomi starts waking up to what God is doing. That's a stage that we all need to get into when we recognize God working in our lives, when we recognize God working in other people's lives. That's where we need to wake up and say, Hey, I see what God is doing now. I see how God is leading now. This is what I'm supposed to do now. This is the next step that God has for me. So that's the third stage, it's a waking up stage, or awakening. But it doesn't just stop there, because the next stage, let's look at chapter 3 here. The next stage comes here. I call it the stage of instruction. Verse 3, chapter 1 says, Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said unto her, My daughter, shall I not seek rest for thee, that it may be well with thee? And now was not Boaz of our kindred, with whose maidens thou wast. Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor. But make not thyself known unto the man, until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie, and shalt go in, and uncover his feet, and lay thee down. And he will tell thee what thou shalt do. She said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will. So going back to verse number 1, Naomi realizes that she has a greater responsibility now. She's gone through that awakening stage. And what she says here is, Shall I not seek rest for you? Is that not our job as Christians to the lost and unsaved world? Is to seek rest for them. Is to seek security for them. I mean, in this case, yes, Naomi's talking to Ruth about security in marriage, security and making sure they should be provided for. For us, that's a greater responsibility, because we're looking at providing security, providing a rest for their souls. It's a greater responsibility, but that's our job. Should we not seek rest for the world? Should we not seek rest for the unconverted? That's our job. And as I said, Naomi woke up to this. She realized this, and this is my part now. This is what I'm supposed to do. And so the next couple of verses, she goes over, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to go here. She gives her all the instructions. This is how you need to get to the Redeemer. That's what we should be doing to folks. Because Ruth is a Moabitess. She doesn't realize Jewish culture. She doesn't understand Jewish culture. And I'm going to admit, I don't know Jewish culture. I don't understand why she had to do all these things before she actually met up with Boaz. But I do know that, is that not the same situation with the unsaved? They don't know a whole lot about church. They don't know a whole lot about God. They don't know a whole lot about Jesus Christ. They may be able to tell you some basic Sunday school things. Oh, well, Jesus Christ is God. He died on a cross. Easter's coming up. We know that He rose from the dead. But they don't understand anything. There's so much that they just don't know. And that's our job. Our job is to lead them to the kingdom. That's what Naomi did. She led her to the kingdom. She couldn't do the redeeming process. She couldn't take care of Ruth after that. But she said, I can take you to Him. That's what we're supposed to do. We can take people lead people to Christ. Christ has to do the work. That's very obvious. But we can lead people to Him. That actually leads me on to some of the next points. If we were to take the time to read through the rest of chapter 3, going to chapter 4, if we're going back to our hallmark analogy here, this would be where the conflict comes in because there's another Redeemer. But we see the resolution in verse 9 of chapter 4. In verse 9 it says, And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, checking my time here, Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, Ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, and to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, from the gate of his place, and ye are witnesses this day. And there's so much in here that it's just such an amazing picture of Christ and what He's done. All the people that were in the gates and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went in unto her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And the woman said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And what I like to point out here is, when the women are talking about this, first they notice what God did. And they also notice why God did it. It wasn't just for the blessing of Naomi, the blessing of Ruth. The whole point of all this was that his name may be famous in Israel. That God's name be famous. It's not about us. It wasn't about Ruth and Naomi. It's about God. Making his name famous in all the world. That's not part of the message. That's just something, that's bonus. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age, for thy daughter-in-law which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. Now, I'm going to go into a stage that you typically don't find in a Hallmark movie. Now, my wife has made note of this several times when watching these movies. You know, you go through all these stages. You have the tragic backstory, the rejection, they wake up to it, you have the conflict and resolution. But what she notices is that they never get onto a wedding. They never really go much on beyond that. There's no continuing with that. But I see here this final stage is a stage of continuation. Naomi, she didn't have to take care of Ruth anymore. That wasn't her responsibility. Boaz was taking care of all that. But yet despite all that, Naomi decided, I still want to be a part of it. I still want to continue in that. And we see that because she took this baby and she became a nurse to it. She took care of it. She continued in their life. And what I learned from that example is that shouldn't we do the same thing with new converts? Shouldn't there be a discipleship? I know, and I've learned a lot on deputation. What I thought I used to see, I'm actually realizing more and more that although there are a lot of churches that don't really have much of a discipleship program, that they don't have much where they're teaching new converts, more and more I'm seeing this where they do that. Where pastors, where the people in the church take that initiative to help these new converts to grow, to learn about Christ, to learn more about the Christian life, to disciple them, to train them. And that is such an important function of the church. It's not just to bring more people in. It's not just about converting them. It's about training them. It's about discipleship. That's such I don't want to call it a forgotten part of the church, but it is an often not talked about part of the church. That's what I see from Naomi. She goes through so many stages. Goes through this rejection. She listens first for what God has to say. Then she rejects the opportunity. Later on, she sees how God is working and she awakens to that. And she has that point where she realizes the next stage is instruction. But she realizes that it doesn't just stop there, that there has to be a continuum. That should be our example. Follow Naomi, to follow her example. Because really, we don't know what could happen if we do. We don't know what can happen if we just take advantage of these opportunities that God brings along our path. Because what I find, and I haven't read it yet, in verse 17, here it says, And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi. They called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. What Naomi didn't realize is that what her obedience brought was the future greatest king that Israel. And if you go even further than that, through Naomi's obedience, we also got the Savior of the world. We have no clue what our obedience. We take advantage of the opportunities that God brings before us. Listen to the Holy Spirit when He says, look at this opportunity. Look at what I've just so happened to bring together. It's the take. What I really love about this is that this is one person. All she did was affect one other person. Sometimes, and this, once again, I'm preaching at myself, I can easily get to the point where I think if I'm going to do something for God, I have to make it big. I have to do something great. I have to be like a Peter who preached Pentecost and 3,000 people. I have to be like a Paul and go all across the then known world and write all these books, and I've got to do something big. And okay, fine, maybe I don't have to do something big, but I have to do it so incredibly well. It has to be perfect. No, it doesn't have to be like that. We saw from Naomi's example, she definitely messed up. She rejected Orpah. We are going to mess up. Ask us to do something big. He doesn't ask us to do something such a perfect thing. Although we should strive to do all things in excellence. All God really asks us to do is just be obedient. Listen, to look at our circumstances, to look at what He's doing and say, this is my part. This is what I'm supposed to do. Ultimately, that's what I learned. So listen to God.
Thank you, brother. Good. All right.